Zelda Jarvis stood at the edge of Fort Laramie in Wyoming Territory, her threadbare dress doing little to protect her from the biting autumn wind of 1878, watching the dust cloud settle where her stepfather's wagon had disappeared down the trail, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and 3 copper pennies in her pocket. The fort bustled with soldiers, traders, and travelers, but none of them spared a glance for the slender woman with dark auburn hair and eyes the color of storm clouds, standing alone near the quartermaster's building with her shoulders squared despite the trembling in her hands. She had known Thomas Barrett was a cruel man when her mother married him 2 years ago, but she had never imagined he would abandon her here, hundreds of miles from anything resembling civilization, simply because she had refused his advances after her mother's death 3 months prior. The sky overhead threatened rain, heavy gray clouds rolling in from the mountains, and Zelda wrapped her arms around herself as she tried to think through her options. She had no family left, no friends in this territory, and 3 copper pennies would not even buy her a meal, much less passage on a wagon train heading anywhere safe. The fort commander would not let her stay indefinitely, she knew that much. Women without means or male guardians were considered problems, distractions for the soldiers, and she would be asked to leave by nightfall if she could not prove she had somewhere to go. A group of soldiers walked past, their eyes lingering on her with expressions that made her skin crawl, and she turned away, pressing herself against the rough wooden wall of the building. She had always been resourceful, had learned to sew and cook and keep house, but none of those skills seemed particularly useful when she had no roof over her head and no prospects for earning one. The reality of her situation was beginning to sink in, cold and heavy as the approaching storm, when she heard boots on the packed earth behind her. "You look like you are waiting for someone who is not coming back," a deep voice said, gentle despite its roughness. Zelda turned to find a tall man standing a respectful distance away, his hat pulled low against the wind. He wore dusty trail clothes, a faded blue shirt and worn leather vest, and his face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. His eyes were a striking shade of hazel, more gold than green, and they studied her with concern rather than the predatory interest she had seen from the soldiers. "That would be an accurate assessment," she said, lifting her chin despite the fear coiling in her stomach. She would not show weakness, not even to this stranger who seemed kind. Kindness could be a mask for worse intentions. The man nodded slowly, glancing toward the trail where Thomas had vanished. "Family, stepfather," Zelda said, the word bitter on her tongue. "He has decided my company was no longer required." Something flickered across the man's face, anger perhaps, quickly controlled. He pulled his hat off, revealing dark brown hair streaked with lighter shades from the sun, and held the hat against his chest in a gesture of respect. "Name is Yates Crawford. I have been trailing cattle from Texas to the railhead in Cheyenne, and I was passing through to gather supplies before heading back south." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "I could not help but notice you have been standing here alone for near an hour, and the sky is about to open up." Zelda felt heat rise to her cheeks. She had not realized anyone had been watching, had been paying attention to her predicament. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Crawford, but I am perfectly capable of managing my own affairs." "I am sure you are," Yates said, his tone suggesting he genuinely meant it. "But managing your affairs would be easier with passage out of here, and I happen to be heading toward Denver in 2 days. My sister runs a boarding house there, and she is always looking for help. Room and board in exchange for work if you are interested." The offer was so unexpected, so perfectly aligned with what she desperately needed that Zelda's first instinct was suspicion. "Why would you help me? You do not know me." Yates put his hat back on, tilting it against the wind. "My mother was left stranded in Santa Fe when I was 10 years old. My father died of fever and we had no money, no way to get home to Missouri. A stranger offered her work and passage, and that kindness saved our lives." He met her eyes directly, his gaze steady and honest. "I figure I owe the world some of that kindness back, but I understand if you do not trust me. I am a stranger, and you have no reason to take me at my word." The first drops of rain began to fall, cold and heavy, and Zelda made her decision. She could stay here and face whatever dangers the night would bring, or she could trust this man who spoke of his mother with respect and offered help without demanding anything in return. What would this arrangement entail exactly? "I have a wagon and supplies, heading south through Colorado territory. The journey takes about 10 days, depending on weather and road conditions. You would have your own bedroll, your own space, and I give you my word I would not lay a hand on you or expect anything improper. When we reach Denver, I introduce you to my sister Clara, and she decides if she wants to hire you. If she does not, or if you do not like the arrangement, I will give you enough money to get yourself started somewhere else." Yates spoke matter-of-factly, as though offering such generosity was the most natural thing in the world. "You have passage now if you want it." The rain was falling harder, and thunder rumbled in the distance. Zelda looked at this stranger, this Yates Crawford with his weathered face and kind eyes, and felt something shift in her chest. Hope, perhaps, or maybe just the recognition that sometimes you had to take a leap of faith or drown in circumstance. "I accept your offer, Mr. Crawford. And I thank you for your kindness." "Yates is fine," he said, a smile finally touching his lips. "Let us get you out of this rain. I have a room at the trading post where we can discuss the details properly, with a chaperone if that would make you more comfortable." "That would be appropriate," Zelda agreed, and she followed him across the fort grounds, her sodden skirts heavy around her ankles, wondering what she had just agreed to and whether this man was truly as honorable as he seemed. The trading post was crowded with soldiers and civilians seeking shelter from the sudden downpour, and Yates led her to a corner table where they could speak with relative privacy. He ordered coffee and stew for both of them, paying with coins from a well-worn leather purse, and Zelda tried not to devour her food too quickly, though she had not eaten since yesterday morning. The warmth of the coffee spread through her chest, easing some of the tension that had been building since Thomas drove away. "Tell me about yourself," Yates said, wrapping his hands around his own tin cup. "If we are going to be traveling together, I should know more than just your situation." Zelda set her spoon down carefully, considering how much to reveal. "My name is Zelda Jarvis. I am 22 years old, originally from Illinois. My mother and I moved west after my father died when I was 16. She married Thomas Barrett 3 years ago, and we settled in Nebraska for a time. When she passed this summer, Thomas decided he no longer wanted the burden of a grown stepdaughter." She kept her voice level, refusing to show how much that betrayal had wounded her. "I can read and write, I can sew and cook, and I am a hard worker. I do not drink or gamble, and I have never been in trouble with the law." Yates listened attentively, his expression growing darker when she mentioned her stepfather's abandonment. "Thomas Barrett is a fool and a coward. Any man who would leave a woman alone in the territories deserves to have his backside kicked from here to Texas." Despite everything, Zelda felt a smile tug at her lips. "That is a generous assessment. I had less charitable thoughts about him." "I imagine you did." Yates took a long drink of his coffee. "For what it is worth, you will be safe with me. I have been working cattle since I was 14, and I have made this trip between Texas and Wyoming more times than I can count. I know the trails, the safe camping spots, and the places to avoid. We will travel during daylight hours, camp well before dark, and I will teach you how to handle a rifle if you do not already know. I can shoot, Zelda said quietly. My father taught me when I was young, but I do not have a weapon. That can be remedied. Yates leaned back in his chair, studying her with an expression she could not quite read. I meant what I said about my sister. Clara is a good woman, fair and honest. She lost her husband to cholera 5 years ago, and she has been running the boarding house on her own since then. She could use reliable help, and you would have a safe place to live while you figure out what you want to do next. Why are you being so kind to me? Zelda asked again, unable to help herself. Surely you must want something in return. Yates was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. When my mother died, she made me promise to always help people when I could, especially women in difficult situations. She said the world was hard enough without folks turning their backs on each other. He focused on Zelda again, his hazel eyes serious. I do not want anything from you except your company on the trail and the knowledge that I kept my promise to her. Does that make sense? It did, in a way that made Zelda's throat tight with unexpected emotion. She had been surrounded by cruelty and selfishness for so long that genuine kindness felt almost foreign, something to be examined and questioned until it revealed its true nature. But Yates seemed sincere, his words backed by the quiet strength of a man who kept his promises and expected nothing in return. Yes, it makes sense. Thank you, Yates. You are welcome, Zelda. He smiled then, a full, genuine smile that transformed his weathered face into something almost handsome, and Zelda felt her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with fear or anxiety. We will leave day after tomorrow, at first light. That gives us tomorrow to gather any supplies you might need and for you to get proper traveling clothes. I have some credit at the sutler's store, and you will need pants and boots for the trail. Skirts are too dangerous around campfires and rough country. The thought of wearing men's clothing felt scandalous and practical all at once, and Zelda nodded. I have 3 cents to contribute to supplies. Yates waved a hand dismissively. Keep your money. You will need it more than I do. He stood, placing a few more coins on the table to cover their meal. I will arrange for you to have a room here tonight, separate and safe. Tomorrow morning, meet me at the sutler's at 8 o'clock and we will get you outfitted properly. Does that suit you? That suits me perfectly, Zelda said, rising as well. Her legs felt unsteady, whether from exhaustion or relief or the unsettling awareness of this man's presence, she could not say. I will not forget your kindness, Yates Crawford. Just pay it forward someday, he said, settling his hat back on his head. That is all the thanks I need. That night, lying in a real bed for what felt like the first time in forever, Zelda stared at the rough wooden ceiling and tried to process everything that had happened. This morning she had been abandoned, terrified, facing a future that held nothing but darkness and danger. Now she had passage south, the promise of work and safety, and a mysterious cowboy who seemed determined to help her without asking for anything improper in return. It felt too good to be true, and yet Yates had done exactly what he promised, securing her a room and treating her with nothing but respect and consideration. She thought about his face, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle strength in his voice. He was older than her, perhaps by 10 years or so, but he carried his age well, with the confidence of a man who knew his place in the world and was comfortable with it. There was something steady about him, something that made her feel safer than she had felt in a very long time, and that realization was both comforting and terrifying in equal measure. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, Zelda dreamed not of abandonment and fear, but of open trails and distant mountains, and a pair of hazel eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the storm having passed during the night, and Zelda met Yates at the sutler's store exactly at 8. He was already there, speaking with the proprietor, and he turned when she entered, his face lighting up with that transformative smile. "Good morning." "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," Zelda admitted. "Thank you again for arranging the room." "My pleasure." Yates gestured to the racks of clothing and supplies that filled the cramped store. "Let us get you outfitted. You will need sturdy pants, at least 2 shirts, a warm coat, good boots, a hat, and gloves. Also a bedroll and a canteen. Anything else you can think of." Zelda felt overwhelmed by his generosity. "This is too much. I cannot possibly accept all of this." "You can and you will," Yates said firmly. "The trail is not forgiving to people who are not properly equipped, and I will not have you suffering because of false pride. Consider it an investment in your future. When you are settled and earning money in Denver, you can pay it forward to someone else who needs help." The logic was sound, and Zelda knew she could not make the journey in her thin dress and worn shoes. She swallowed her pride and nodded. "Very well, but I will pay you back somehow." "If it makes you feel better to think that way, fine," Yates said, though his tone suggested he had no expectation of repayment. He helped her select practical clothing, turning his back politely when she needed to try on the pants to ensure they fit properly. The boots were sturdy leather, broken in enough to be comfortable but still with plenty of wear left in them, and the coat was thick wool with a hood that would protect her from rain and wind. When she emerged fully dressed in her new trail clothes, Yates gave her an approving nod. "You look like you could wrangle cattle yourself. How do they feel?" "Strange," Zelda admitted, unused to the freedom of movement the pants allowed. "But practical. I can see why men prefer them." "Wait until you try sitting by a fire in a skirt and the wind keeps blowing sparks at you," Yates said with a chuckle. "You will never want to go back to dresses on the trail." They spent the rest of the morning gathering supplies for the journey, including dried beef, beans, coffee, flour, and hardtack. Yates moved through the preparations with practiced efficiency, checking and rechecking their supplies against a mental list, and Zelda found herself watching him with growing respect. He was clearly a man who took his responsibilities seriously, who planned ahead and prepared for contingencies, and that attention to detail made her feel even safer about the journey ahead. In the afternoon, Yates took her to the edge of the fort where his wagon was being loaded with the supplies he had purchased for his return trip. The wagon was solid and well-maintained, pulled by 2 sturdy horses, and there was a canvas cover stretched over wooden bows to provide shelter from the elements. "This is home for the next week and a half," Yates said, patting the side of the wagon. "Not fancy, but it keeps the rain off." "It looks wonderful," Zelda said honestly. After spending last night convinced she would be sleeping in the mud, a covered wagon seemed like a palace. Yates showed her how everything was organized, where the food was stored, where her bedroll would go, and where the rifle was kept in case of emergency. "We will camp away from the wagon most nights, but if the weather is bad, you can sleep inside while I sleep underneath. That keeps things proper and gives us both shelter." He met her eyes, his expression serious. "I know I keep saying this, but I want you to feel safe. If at any point you are uncomfortable or worried, you tell me immediately. Understood?" "Understood," Zelda agreed, touched by his continued consideration. "But I trust you, Yates. You have given me no reason not to." Something warm flickered in his eyes there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. "I am glad. Trust is important, especially on the trail." They spent the rest of the day in preparation, and as the sun began to set, Yates walked Zelda back to the trading post for supper. They ate together again, this time with less awkwardness, and their conversation flowed more naturally. Yates told her about his cattle work, about the long drives from Texas to the railheads, about the other cowboys he worked with, and the challenges of keeping hundreds of animals moving in the right direction. Zelda found herself laughing at his stories, at the dry humor with which he described near disasters and unlikely triumphs, and she realized she had not laughed like this in longer than she could remember. "What about you?" Yates asked over coffee. "What did you want to do before circumstances got in the way?" Zelda thought about it, trying to remember the girl she had been before her father died, before her mother remarried, before everything fell apart. "I wanted to be a teacher. I always loved reading, loved learning new things. My father encouraged it, said a good education was worth more than gold." She smiled sadly. "That was before we lost him and had to focus on survival instead of dreams. Teachers are always needed out west," Yates said thoughtfully. "Denver has schools and they are growing all the time. Once you get settled, you could look into teaching opportunities. I know Clara would support that." The idea that her dreams might not be completely dead, that she might have a chance to build the life she had once imagined, made Zelda's eyes sting with unexpected tears. "You really think that is possible?" "I think anything is possible if you want it badly enough and you are willing to work for it," Yates said simply. "You strike me as someone who is not afraid of hard work." "I am not," Zelda agreed. "I just need the opportunity to prove it." "Then, that is what we will get you," Yates promised, and the certainty in his voice made her believe him. That night, back in her borrowed room, Zelda lay awake thinking about the future for the first time in months. Tomorrow they would leave Fort Laramie and begin the journey south, into unknown territory, with a man she had only known for 2 days. It should have terrified her, but instead she felt a cautious optimism, a sense that maybe, just maybe, her luck was finally changing. And as she drifted off to sleep, she found herself thinking not about Denver or teaching or even her own survival, but about Yates Crawford's smile and the way his presence made her feel like she could breathe again. They departed at dawn as planned, the fort's gates opening to let them through just as the sun crested the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Zelda sat on the wagon seat beside Yates, her new coat wrapped tight against the morning chill, watching the landscape unfold before them. The trail south wound through rolling plains dotted with sagebrush and occasional stands of cottonwood, and in the distance, the mountains rose like jagged teeth against the sky. Yates drove with relaxed confidence, the reins loose in his hands, occasionally pointing out landmarks or wildlife. A small herd of antelope watched them pass from a safe distance, their white rumps flashing as they bounded away, and overhead a hawk circled lazily in the clear air. The wagon creaked and rattled over the rough trail, but the motion was not unpleasant, almost soothing in its rhythm. "How long have you been working cattle?" Zelda asked after they had been traveling for an hour or so. "Since I was 14, like I mentioned. My father died when I was 10, and my mother moved us to Texas to live with her brother. He owned a ranch, ran cattle and horses, and he taught me everything I know about livestock." Yates kept his eyes on the trail as he spoke. "I worked for him until I was 20, then started hiring on with different outfits, following the cattle trails north. Been doing it for 12 years now." "That's a long time," Zelda said, doing the math. "So you are 32. "Just turned 33 last month," Yates confirmed. Old by cowboy standards. Most men my age have settled down, started families, but I guess I never found the right situation. He glanced at her briefly, something unreadable in his expression. What about you? Surely you have had suitors. Zelda felt her cheeks warm. A few back in Illinois before my father died. But after we moved west, my mother was so focused on survival and then on pleasing Thomas that there was no time or opportunity for courting. She paused, then added honestly, and Thomas discouraged any interest from young men. I think he liked keeping me dependent and isolated. Yates' jaw tightened. I am sorry you went through that. No one deserves to be treated like property. I did not feel like a person in that house, Zelda admitted quietly. I felt like something to be used and discarded when no longer convenient. When my mother was alive, she tried to protect me, but after she died, there was nothing standing between me and Thomas's cruelty. He never hurt you, did he? Yates asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. Not physically, Zelda said. But he said things, made suggestions, looked at me in ways that made my skin crawl. I knew I had to get away from him, but I had no money, no means of escape. When he offered to take me to Fort Laramie to visit his sister, I thought maybe there would be an opportunity. I never imagined he would just leave me there. Men like that are cowards, Yates said flatly. They prey on people weaker than themselves because it makes them feel powerful. I have met plenty of his type and they are all the same. Worthless. They rode in silence for a while, and Zelda found herself grateful for Yates' anger on her behalf. It validated her own feelings, confirmed that what she had endured was wrong, and knowing that someone else understood and cared made the weight of those memories a little easier to bear. By midday, they stopped to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch of jerky and hardtack. Yates showed Zelda how to check the horses' hooves for stones and how to adjust the harness for maximum comfort. She watched carefully, memorizing each step, determined to be useful rather than simply a passenger. When they set off again, she felt a small sense of pride at having learned something new, at being capable and competent. The afternoon passed peacefully, the landscape slowly changing as they traveled south. The plains gave way to more varied terrain, with rocky outcroppings and deeper gullies, and Yates navigated the trail with practiced ease. They talked about small things, trading stories about their childhoods, about books they had read and places they had seen. And Zelda found herself relaxing in his company in a way she had not relaxed around anyone in years. As the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, Yates guided the wagon off the main trail toward a stand of cottonwoods near a small creek. We will camp here tonight. There is water and shelter, and it is far enough from the trail that we will have privacy. He unhitched the horses while Zelda gathered deadwood for a fire, following his earlier instructions about what made good firewood and what to avoid. By the time darkness fell, they had a cheerful blaze going and coffee brewing in a battered tin pot. Yates produced a skillet and began frying salt pork and beans, the smell making Zelda's mouth water despite the simplicity of the meal. They ate sitting on logs near the fire, the night alive with sounds of crickets and the distant yip of coyotes. The stars overhead were brilliant, more numerous than Zelda had ever seen, a glittering tapestry that seemed to go on forever. She stared up at them, feeling small and insignificant and somehow comforted by that smallness. Beautiful, are they not? Yates said softly, following her gaze. I never get tired of nights like this. Makes all the hard days worth it. I have never seen so many stars, Zelda breathed. In town there was always too much light, too many buildings, but out here it is like the whole universe is on display. One of the benefits of the trail, Yates agreed. That and the silence, or as close to silence as you can get with nature all around. He poured them both more coffee, the tin cups warming their hands in the cooling night air. "Tomorrow, we will cross into Colorado territory. The landscape changes a bit, gets more mountainous, but the trail is good all the way to Denver." "How often do you make this journey?" Zelda asked, curling her hands around her cup. "4 or 5 times a year, depending on the season and the work available. I have a regular circuit, Texas to Cheyenne for the cattle, then down to Denver to visit Clara and pick up supplies, then back to Texas to start over." Yates stared into the fire, his face thoughtful. "It is a good life, but a lonely one. Most of the men I work with are younger, and they spend their pay on whiskey and gambling. I prefer to save mine, send money to Clara to help with the boarding house, and keep enough back to eventually buy my own land." "You want your own ranch?" Zelda asked, intrigued by this glimpse into his dreams. "Someday," Yates said with a slight smile. "Nothing huge, just enough land to run some cattle and horses, maybe grow some crops. A place that is mine where I can put down roots and build something permanent." He glanced at her, his expression almost shy. "I know it is not an exciting dream, but it is what I want." "It sounds wonderful," Zelda said honestly. "Stability and permanence, building something of your own. There is nothing more exciting than that, not really. Everything else is just noise." Yates looked at her for a long moment, the firelight casting shadows across his weathered face, and Zelda felt something shift between them, something intangible but undeniable. The air seemed charged with possibility, with the sense that they were standing on the edge of something significant, though neither of them was quite ready to name it yet. "You should get some sleep," Yates said finally, breaking the moment. "We have a long day tomorrow and you need to rest." Zelda nodded, reluctant to end the conversation but recognizing the wisdom in his words. She took her bedroll from the wagon and laid it out near the fire, close enough for warmth, but not so close as to be dangerous. Yates added more wood to the fire and settled himself on the opposite side, his own bedroll spread on the ground, his rifle within easy reach. "Good night, Zelda," he said softly. "Good night, Yates," she replied, and she lay down, pulling the blankets up to her chin, staring at the stars until sleep finally claimed her. The days fell into a comfortable rhythm as they traveled south. They rose at dawn, ate a simple breakfast, and were on the trail by the time the sun cleared the horizon. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat, then continued until late afternoon when they would find a suitable place to camp. Yates taught Zelda how to shoot the rifle, how to read the signs of changing weather, how to navigate by the stars and the sun. She proved an apt student, quick to learn and eager to be useful, and Yates seemed pleased with her progress. They talked for hours as they traveled, sharing more of their histories, their hopes and fears. Zelda learned that Yates had been engaged once when he was 25, to a girl in Texas who decided she could not bear the uncertainty of a cowboy's life and married a shopkeeper instead. He spoke of it without bitterness, but Zelda sensed the wound had gone deep, had made him cautious about opening his heart again. She told him about her father, about the dreams they had shared for her future, and about how lost she had felt since his death, like she was adrift without an anchor. "You are finding your way now," Yates said one evening as they sat by the fire. They had been on the trail for 5 days, and the mountains loomed closer with each passing mile. "I can see it in you. You are stronger than you think, Zelda." "I do not feel strong," she admitted. "I feel like I am barely holding myself together." "Strength is not about never being afraid or hurt," Yates said, poking at the fire with a stick. "It is about getting up every morning and facing whatever comes, even when you are terrified. By that measure, you are one of the strongest people I know." His words settled over her like a warm blanket, and Zelda felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you for saying that, and thank you for everything else. I know I keep thanking you, but I do not know how else to express what your kindness has meant to me." Yates looked at her across the fire, his hazel eyes bright in the flickering light. "You do not have to thank me, Zelda. Helping you has been my privilege, not my burden." He paused, seeming to struggle with something. "Can I be honest with you about something?" "Of course," Zelda said, her heart suddenly beating faster. "When I first saw you at Fort Laramie, I thought you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. Not just physically, though you are lovely, but there was something in the way you held yourself, the way you refused to crumble even though you were clearly terrified. And these past days, getting to know you, learning about your strength and intelligence and kindness, I have found myself thinking that maybe the reason I never settled down before was because I was waiting to meet someone like you." Yates spoke carefully, his words measured. "I know this is neither the time nor the place for such declarations, and I know you have every reason to be cautious of men after what you have been through. But I wanted you to know that my feelings for you go beyond simple kindness or obligation. You have come to mean a great deal to me, Zelda Jarvis." Zelda's breath caught in her throat. She had sensed the growing connection between them, had felt her own feelings deepening with each passing day, but she had not dared to hope that Yates might feel the same way. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. "You do not have to say anything," Yates assured her. "I just wanted to be honest about where I stand. There is no pressure, no expectation. When we get to Denver, you will have the opportunity to build the life you want, independent and free. If that life includes me in some capacity, I would be honored. If it does not, I will accept that and still consider myself blessed to have known you." The sincerity in his voice, the vulnerability he was showing her, made Zelda's decision easy. "Yates Crawford, I think you are the finest man I have ever met. These days with you have been the happiest I can remember in years, and not just because you saved me from a terrible situation. You make me laugh, you make me feel capable and strong, and when I am with you, I feel like I can be myself without fear of judgment or cruelty." She took a shaky breath. "I do not know exactly what that means for the future, but I know I want to find out. I want to see where this connection between us might lead, if you are willing to be patient with me while I figure out who I am and what I want." Yates' face transformed with a smile so bright it rivaled the fire. "I am the most patient man you will ever meet, especially when it comes to something as important as this. We will take it one day at a time, at whatever pace feels right to you. Does that sound agreeable?" "That sounds perfect," Zelda said, smiling back at him, and the joy in her heart was so intense it almost frightened her. How had she gone from abandoned and hopeless to sitting by a campfire with a good man who made her feel cherished and valued? The change was so dramatic, so unexpected that it felt almost like a dream, but it was real. Yates was real, and so were his feelings for her, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, Zelda allowed herself to hope for a future that held something more than mere survival. The next morning they crossed into Colorado territory, the landscape changing as they climbed into more mountainous terrain. The air grew cooler and thinner, scented with pine instead of sage, and the views were spectacular, with snow-capped peaks visible in the distance. Yates pointed out landmarks, telling her stories about previous trips through this country, and Zelda drank it all in, feeling alive and aware in a way she had never experienced before. They were 3 days from Denver when the first real trouble appeared. They had stopped for their midday rest, the horses grazing peacefully nearby when Yates suddenly tensed, his hand moving to the rifle. "Get in the wagon," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on something in the distance. Zelda followed his gaze and saw 3 riders approaching, moving fast. Her heart began to race, but she kept her voice steady. "Who are they?" "I do not know, but anyone riding that hard is either being chased or doing the chasing, and either way I do not want to find out which." Yates helped her into the wagon, then positioned himself beside it, the rifle held ready but not raised. "Stay quiet and let me do the talking." The riders pulled up in a cloud of dust, their horses lathered with sweat. They were rough-looking men, unshaven and dirty, with hard eyes that assessed the wagon and its occupants with calculating interest. The one in front, a lean man with a scar running from his eyebrow to his jaw, grinned unpleasantly. "Afternoon, friend. That is a nice wagon you have got there." "Afternoon," Yates replied evenly, his body language relaxed but alert. "Just passing through, no trouble intended." "No trouble," the scarred man agreed. "We are just poor travelers looking for some assistance. Maybe you could spare some supplies, or maybe that pretty lady in the wagon would like to come with us for a while." Zelda felt ice slide down her spine, but Yates did not so much as flinch. "The lady is spoken for, and my supplies are my own. I suggest you ride on and find your assistance elsewhere." The three men exchanged glances, and the scarred one's grin faded. "Now, that is not very neighborly. Here we are, asking politely, and you are being unfriendly. Maybe we should take what we need instead of asking." Yates raised the rifle in one smooth motion, the barrel pointed directly at the scarred man's chest. "Maybe you should reconsider that plan. I am a fair shot, and at this distance I will not miss. Even if your friends get me, you will be dead before you hit the ground. Is that a trade you are willing to make?" The tension stretched taut as a bowstring, and Zelda held her breath, praying this would not end in violence. The scarred man stared at Yates, weighing his options, and finally shrugged. "You are not worth the trouble, friend. We will find easier pickings down the trail." He turned his horse, gesturing for his companions to follow. "But you watch yourself. This country is not as safe as you might think." They rode off, and Yates kept the rifle raised until they disappeared over a rise. Only then did he lower it, expelling a long breath. "Are you all right?" he asked, turning to Zelda. She climbed out of the wagon on shaky legs. "I am fine." "Were they really going to attack us?" "Hard to say," Yates admitted. "Some men are all talk, trying to intimidate people into handing over supplies without a fight. Others are genuinely dangerous. I did not want to take the chance." He checked the rifle, then slung it over his shoulder. "We should move. If they decide to come back with reinforcements, I want to be long gone." They traveled faster than usual for the rest of the day, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the encounter. Yates kept a constant watch on their back trail, and that night he insisted they camp without a fire, not wanting to advertise their position. They ate cold food and spoke in whispers, and Zelda lay awake in her bedroll, listening to every rustle and crack in the darkness, her heart jumping at each sound. "Sleep," Yates said softly from his position nearby. "I will keep watch. You are safe, I promise." His voice, steady and sure, helped calm her racing thoughts. "Do you ever get scared out here?" she asked quietly. "Of course," Yates said. "Anyone who says they are never scared is either lying or stupid, but being scared does not mean you let fear control you. You acknowledge it, respect it, and then you do what needs to be done anyway." "You were very brave today," Zelda said, facing down 3 armed men without hesitation. "I was protecting something important," Yates replied, and even though she could not see his face in the darkness, she could hear the emotion in his voice. "That makes the risk worthwhile." Zelda felt warmth spread through her chest despite the cold night air. She was falling in love with this man, she realized. It was happening faster than she had thought possible, but it was undeniable. Yates Crawford, with his quiet strength and unwavering kindness, had somehow captured her heart in the space of a week, and the thought of reaching Denver and saying goodbye to him was becoming more painful with each passing day. "Yates," she whispered. "Yes. When we get to Denver, if your sister does not need help at the boarding house, or if the arrangement does not work out for some reason, what happens then?" There was a pause, and then Yates said carefully, "Then we figure out another solution. I will not abandon you, Zelda. Whatever happens, we will face it together if you want me by your side." "I want that," Zelda said, her voice thick with emotion. "I want that very much." "Then, that is what we will do," Yates promised, and Zelda finally let herself drift off to sleep, feeling safer than she had any right to feel given their circumstances. The remaining days of the journey passed without further incident. They saw other travelers on the trail, freight wagons and mail coaches and groups of settlers heading west, but no more threatening encounters. The land continued to change as they descended from the mountains toward Denver, the terrain becoming more settled, with farms and small homesteads dotting the landscape. They were entering civilization again, and while Zelda was grateful for the relative safety that represented, she also felt a pang of sadness that their journey together was nearly over. On the 10th day of travel, they crested a rise and saw Denver spread out below them, a growing city nestled against the mountains. Buildings of wood and brick lined dusty streets, and Zelda could see the bustle of activity even from a distance. It was bigger than she had expected, more established, and the sight of it filled her with both excitement and trepidation. "There it is," Yates said, pulling the wagon to a halt so they could take in the view. "Denver, Colorado Territory. Clara's boarding house is on the north side of town, near the church. We should arrive by late afternoon." "It is bigger than I imagined," Zelda said, her eyes wide. "It looks almost like a real city." "It has been growing fast since the silver strikes," Yates explained. "Miners and speculators and businessmen all flocking here, hoping to make their fortunes. That is why Clara does so well with the boarding house. There is always demand for clean, respectable lodging." He glanced at her, his expression soft. "You are going to love it here, Zelda. Denver has culture and opportunity, schools and churches and libraries. It is a good place to build a life." "Will you stay for a while?" Zelda asked, unable to keep the hope out of her voice. "Or do you have to head back to Texas right away?" "I always spend at least a week or two in Denver, helping Clara with repairs and heavy work around the boarding house," Yates said. "So you will not be rid of me immediately." He smiled, reaching over to briefly squeeze her hand. "And I have been thinking that maybe this year I will stay longer. I have saved enough money that I can afford to take some time off from the cattle drives, and there is plenty of work available in Denver for someone with my skills. If I wanted to stay through the winter, I could." The implications of that statement made Zelda's heart soar. "I would like that very much," she said, squeezing his hand back. "Having you nearby while I adjust to this new life would mean everything to me." "Then that is what we will do," Yates said decisively. He released her hand and picked up the reins again, guiding the wagon down the slope toward the city. "Let us go meet Clara and get you settled. Your new life starts today, Zelda Jarvis." Clara Crawford turned out to be a plump, cheerful woman in her 40s with the same hazel eyes as her brother, and a warm smile that immediately put Zelda at ease. She enveloped Zelda in a motherly hug the moment they were introduced, then stepped back to look her over with approval. "My goodness, you are a pretty thing, are you not? And Yates says you need work. Well, I always have need of reliable help, and anyone my brother vouches for is good enough for me." She turned to Yates, her eyes twinkling. "You are looking well, little brother. The trail agrees with you." The company was better than usual, Yates said, glancing at Zelda with a smile that made her blush. Clara noticed the look and her smile widened. I see. Well, come inside, both of you. Let us get you settled, Miss Jarvis, and then we can discuss the particulars of the arrangement. The boarding house was a solid two-story structure with a wide front porch and well-tended flower boxes in the windows. Inside, it was clean and comfortable, with polished wood floors and simple but sturdy furniture. Clara showed Zelda to a small room on the second floor that would be hers in exchange for her work, and Zelda felt tears prick her eyes at the sight of it. It was not large, but it had a real bed with clean linens, a small dresser, a washstand with a mirror, and a window that looked out over the street. It was the nicest room she had ever had all to herself. The work is not difficult, Clara explained as they returned downstairs to the kitchen. Cooking, cleaning, laundry, changing linens for the boarders, serving meals. I have 6 rooms rented out currently, all to respectable gentlemen, miners and clerks and the like. They pay for room and board, 2 meals a day, and in exchange they get a clean place to sleep and good food. You would help me with all of that, and in return you get your room, your meals, and a small wage. Does that sound acceptable? It sounds like a blessing, Zelda said honestly. I cannot thank you enough for this opportunity, Mrs. Crawford. Clara, please. And you are welcome, dear. Any friend of Yates is a friend of mine, and he seems quite taken with you. Clara's eyes sparkled with mischief. I have never seen my brother look at anyone the way he looks at you. It does my heart good. Zelda felt her cheeks warm again, but she could not help smiling. He has been very kind to me. I do not know what would have happened if he had not offered to help when he did. That is Yates, Clara said fondly. He has always had a soft heart for people in need, even when we were children. He once gave away his only coat to a boy who was colder than he was, and our mother had to scold him even as she was proud of his generosity. She patted Zelda's hand. You are in good hands with my brother, dear. He is one of the good ones. I am beginning to realize that, Zelda said softly. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity and adjustment. Zelda threw herself into her work at the boarding house, learning Clara's routines and preferences, getting to know the boarders, and discovering that she genuinely enjoyed the work. It was satisfying to cook good meals and see people enjoy them, to keep the house clean and welcoming, to create a comfortable environment for people far from their own homes. Clara was a patient and encouraging teacher, quick to praise and slow to criticize, and Zelda felt herself blossoming under the older woman's guidance. And Yates was there, a constant and reassuring presence. He stayed at the boarding house in his usual room, helping with repairs and maintenance, and he spent every free moment with Zelda. They took walks through Denver in the evenings, exploring the growing city, and Yates showed her the library, the school where she might someday teach, the church where Clara attended services. They talked endlessly, sharing their dreams and fears, and with each conversation, Zelda felt her love for him deepening, becoming something solid and real and unshakable. One evening, about 3 weeks after their arrival, Yates took Zelda to a small restaurant for dinner, a rare treat away from the boarding house. They sat at a corner table, the lamplight casting a warm glow, and Yates reached across to take her hand. I have been doing a lot of thinking, he said seriously, about the future, about what I want my life to look like, and I keep coming back to the same conclusion. Zelda's heart began to pound. What conclusion is that? That I do not want to spend another season on the cattle trails, away from the people and places that matter. I do not want to chase a dream of owning land someday when I could be building something real right here, right now. Yates took a deep breath, his eyes locked on hers. Zelda, I know we have not known each other long, and I know you have plans for your own future. But I love you. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you at Fort Laramie, and every day since then has only made me more certain. I want to build a life with you if you will have me." Tears spilled down Zelda's cheeks, but they were tears of joy. "I love you too, Yates. I have been afraid to say it, afraid it was too soon or too impossible, but I love you so much it terrifies me." Yates smiled, that brilliant transformative smile she had come to adore, and he stood, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "Then marry me. Let us start our life together here in Denver. I can find work, good steady work, and you can keep working for Clara until you are ready to pursue teaching if that is still what you want. We can save money and eventually buy a little house, maybe even that ranch I dreamed about. But whatever we do it together. What do you say?" "Yes," Zelda said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Yates Crawford, I will marry you. I cannot imagine anything I want more than to be your wife and build a life with you." He kissed her then, right there in the restaurant with other diners looking on with indulgent smiles, and Zelda felt like her heart might burst with happiness. 2 months ago she had been abandoned, hopeless, convinced her life was over. Now she was standing in the arms of the man she loved, with a future stretching out before them full of possibility and promise. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for, and she vowed to treasure every moment of it. They were married a month later in a simple ceremony at the church Clara attended, with Clara standing as Zelda's witness and a cowboy friend of Yates serving as his. Zelda wore a dress Clara helped her sew, pale blue with delicate lace at the collar, and Yates wore a new suit that made him look almost uncomfortable in its formality. But when he took her hands and spoke his vows, his voice was steady and sure, and Zelda knew with absolute certainty that she was making the right choice. Clara hosted a small celebration at the boarding house afterward, with cake and cider and a few close friends. And that night, Zelda and Yates began their married life in the small room at the boarding house that was now theirs to share. Yates was gentle and patient, making sure she was comfortable and cared for, and Zelda marveled at how natural it felt to be with him, how right and good and safe. "I love you, Mrs. Crawford," Yates whispered in the darkness, holding her close. "I love you too, Mr. Crawford," Zelda replied, her heart full to overflowing. "Thank you for giving me passage that day at the fort. You saved my life in every way that matters." "You saved mine too," Yates said softly. "I did not even realize I was lost until I found you." The first year of their marriage was marked by hard work and quiet joy. Yates found steady employment as a foreman at a lumber yard, overseeing shipments and managing workers, and his reputation for honesty and reliability quickly made him indispensable. Zelda continued working for Clara, and in her spare time, she began studying to take the teaching examination. The work was challenging but fulfilling, and she loved the feeling of working toward a dream that had once seemed impossible. They saved every penny they could, living frugally but happily, and by their first anniversary, they had enough to put a down payment on a small house on the edge of town. It was just 2 rooms with a lean-to kitchen, but it had good bones and a decent plot of land, and Yates promised to add on to it as their family grew. They moved in on a bright spring day, carrying their few possessions with the help of Clara and some friends, and that night they sat on their own front porch watching the sun set over the mountains, marveling at how far they had come. "You ever think about that day at Fort Laramie?" Zelda asked, leaning against Yates' shoulder. "All the time," Yates admitted. "I think about how easily I could have ridden past without stopping, how different our lives would be if I had not followed my instinct to help." He kissed the top of her head. "I thank God every day that I stopped, that I had the chance to know you and love you. I was so scared that day, Zelda said. I thought my life was over, that I would end up dead or worse. And then you appeared like an answer to a prayer I had not even finished praying. She turned to look at him, her eyes shining. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Yates Crawford. And you are the best thing that ever happened to me, Zelda Crawford, he replied, and he kissed her properly, long and sweet and full of promise. 2 years after their marriage, Zelda passed her teaching examination with high marks and was hired to teach at a small school on the outskirts of Denver. She taught children ranging from 6 to 14, and she threw herself into the work with passion and dedication. Yates was so proud of her he could barely contain it, telling everyone who would listen about his brilliant wife, the schoolteacher. And Zelda felt like she was finally living the life her father had dreamed for her. That same year, Zelda discovered she was pregnant, and their joy was tinged with natural nervousness. But Clara was there to guide her through the pregnancy with wisdom and reassurance. And when Zelda went into labor on a cold January morning, it was Clara and the midwife who saw her through the long hours until their son was born. They named him William after Zelda's father, and Yates held the tiny baby with such tenderness and awe that Zelda fell in love with him all over again. He is perfect, Yates whispered, his eyes bright with unshed tears. You did so well, my love. Look at what we made together. He has your eyes, Zelda said tiredly, smiling at the sight of her husband cradling their son. He is going to be tall and strong like his father. I hope he has your intelligence and kindness, Yates said. That would be a far greater gift. William thrived, a healthy and happy baby who rarely fussed and seemed to find endless fascination in the world around him. Zelda took a few months away from teaching to focus on motherhood, and she found that she loved this new role just as much as she loved teaching. Yates was a devoted father, coming home from the lumber yard each evening eager to hold his son and help with his care, and their small house was filled with laughter and love. By the time William was 2, they had saved enough to add 2 more rooms onto the house, and Zelda returned to teaching part-time, leaving William in Clara's capable care during the mornings. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm, and Zelda sometimes had to pinch herself to believe this was really her life, that she had been blessed with such happiness and security. When William was 4, Zelda gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Grace, who brought twice the chaos and twice the joy into their growing family. Yates expanded the house again, adding a second story, and Clara sold the boarding house to move in with them, helping to care for the children and manage the household while Zelda balanced teaching and motherhood. It was a full and busy life, but it was exactly what they had both wanted. A home filled with love and laughter and the sound of children playing. Yates eventually left the lumber yard to start his own small construction business, building houses and barns for the rapidly growing city, and his reputation for quality work meant he was never short of contracts. Together, he and Zelda built a comfortable life, not wealthy but secure, with enough for their needs and a little extra to help those less fortunate. As the years passed, they never forgot the lesson of their beginning, that a single act of kindness could change the entire trajectory of a life. They made it a point to help others whenever they could, offering work to those down on their luck, providing meals to families struggling through hard times, and teaching their children the importance of compassion and generosity. William grew into a thoughtful and studious boy who loved books as much as his mother did, and he went on to become a lawyer, fighting for justice and fairness in the growing city. Emma, practical and business-minded, took over Yates' construction business when he retired, becoming one of the few female contractors in Denver and earning respect through her skill and determination. Grace, creative and free-spirited, became an artist, painting the landscapes and people of Colorado with a talent that brought her regional recognition. Zelda taught for 30 years before retiring, and in that time she influenced hundreds of students, many of whom went on to successful careers, and later credited her with believing in them when no one else did. She never forgot what it felt like to be hopeless and abandoned, and she made sure every child in her classroom knew they were valued and capable of great things, regardless of their circumstances. Yates worked until he was well into his 60s, finally retiring when his body began to protest the physical demands of construction work. He spent his retirement years woodworking in the shed behind their house, creating beautiful furniture for his children and grandchildren, and tending the garden that had grown from a few vegetable plants into a thriving landscape of flowers and fruit trees. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, a gathering so large it spilled out of their house and into the yard. Clara, now in her 80s but still sharp as ever, gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying at the same time, recounting the story of how Yates had arrived at her boarding house with a beautiful young woman he had rescued and promptly fallen in love with. "I knew the moment I saw them together that this was something special," Clara said, raising her glass. "The way my brother looked at Zelda, like she hung the moon and stars, and the way she looked at him, like he was the answer to every prayer she had ever whispered. 40 years later, they still look at each other that way, and that is the greatest testament to true love I have ever witnessed. To Yates and Zelda, may you have 40 more years together." "Hear, hear," the crowd echoed, and Zelda wiped tears from her eyes, leaning into Yates' side. "Can you believe it has been 40 years?" she whispered to him. "Sometimes it feels like just yesterday that I was standing at Fort Laramie with nothing but 3 pennies in my pocket. Best day of my life when I decided to offer you passage," Yates said, kissing her temple. "Everything good in my life stems from that decision. You gave me passage out of darkness and into light," Zelda said softly. "You gave me hope when I had none, and you loved me when I felt unlovable. I will never stop being grateful for that day, for you, for everything we have built together." "We built it together," Yates corrected gently. "I may have offered the passage, but you were the one brave enough to take it, to trust a stranger and believe in the possibility of something better. Your courage and strength made all of this possible." They sat together in the midst of their large, loud, loving family, and Zelda reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From abandonment and despair to love and fulfillment, from a terrified young woman with no prospects to a respected teacher and beloved matriarch. Her life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. And it had all started with a cowboy who stopped to help when he had no obligation to do so, who saw value in her when she felt worthless, who offered her not just physical passage but emotional and spiritual passage into a new life. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Zelda took Yates' weathered hand in hers and knew with absolute certainty that she had lived a good life, a meaningful life, a life filled with love and purpose. The scared girl abandoned at Fort Laramie was still part of her, but she was also the strong woman who had built a family and a legacy, who had loved and been loved in return. "I love you, Yates Crawford," she said, the same words she had spoken countless times over 40 years, but which never lost their power or meaning. "I love you, Zelda Crawford," he replied, his voice steady despite his age, his eyes still holding that same warmth that had drawn her to him all those years ago. Today, tomorrow, and forever. The next decade brought its share of challenges. Clara passed away peacefully in her sleep at 89, and her loss was deeply felt by the entire family. She was buried next to her long-dead husband, and Zelda made sure to visit her grave regularly, bringing flowers and sharing news of the family, knowing that Clara would have wanted to know every detail. Yates' health began to decline as he entered his 70s, his joints stiff with arthritis and his energy flagging. But he remained cheerful and engaged, delighting in his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on his skills and wisdom to anyone who would listen. He taught William's son how to work wood, showed Emma's daughters how to read a building plan, and told Grace's children stories about the old days on the cattle trails and the wild, untamed West they would never know. Zelda, meanwhile, remained remarkably healthy and active, volunteering at the library and mentoring young teachers, writing letters to former students, and maintaining the garden Yates could no longer tend. She adapted to each stage of life with grace, finding purpose and meaning even as her role shifted from teacher and mother to grandmother and community elder. They celebrated their 50th anniversary more quietly than their 40th, just immediate family in their home, but it was no less meaningful. Yates, now 75 and moving slowly but still sharp of mind, stood with effort and cleared his throat to address the gathered family. 50 years ago, I made the best decision of my life when I asked this extraordinary woman to marry me. She could have said no. She had every reason to be cautious, to protect her heart after everything she had been through. But she took a chance on a rough cowboy who loved her more than he loved anything else in the world, and she made me the happiest man alive. His voice cracked with emotion, and Zelda reached up to take his hand. Zelda, you are my heart, my home, my greatest adventure. Thank you for 50 years of love and partnership. Thank you for our children, our grandchildren, our beautiful, chaotic, wonderful family. Thank you for being exactly who you are. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible, Zelda said, standing beside him despite the tears streaming down her face. Thank you for offering me passage when I had nowhere to go. Thank you for 50 years of love, laughter, challenges met and overcome together. You are my hero, Yates Crawford, today and always. They kissed, a gentle press of lips that held 50 years of shared history, and their family erupted in applause and tears, witnessing a love that had endured and deepened across 5 decades. Yates passed away peacefully 2 years later at the age of 77, with Zelda holding his hand, and their children gathered around. His last words were, "I love you," directed at Zelda, and she held him as he slipped away, her heart breaking even as she was grateful he had gone peacefully, without pain or fear. The grief was immense, a vast ocean she had to learn to navigate. After 52 years of marriage, of sharing every joy and sorrow, of building a life together, his absence was a physical ache that never fully healed. But Zelda was sustained by their children and grandchildren, by the community they had built, by the memories of a love that had been true and deep and transformative. She lived for another 8 years, watching her great-grandchildren grow, writing down the story of how she and Yates had met for future generations, tending the garden that had been their shared project. She never remarried, never wanted to. Yates had been her once-in-a-lifetime love, and she was content to cherish his memory until they could be reunited. On a warm autumn evening, very much like the day they had first traveled together toward Denver, Zelda passed away in her sleep at the age of 82. She was buried beside Yates under a cottonwood tree in the cemetery overlooking Denver, their graves marked with a simple stone that read, Yates Crawford, 1845–1924 Zelda Jarvis Crawford, 1856–1938 "You have passage now, beloved husband and wife, parents, grandparents forever together at her funeral." Their children and grandchildren shared stories of Yates and Zelda, of their love and kindness, of the legacy they had left. William spoke of his father's integrity and his mother's wisdom. Emma talked about their generosity and their commitment to helping others. Grace read from the memoir Zelda had written, describing that first meeting at Fort Laramie, the journey to Denver, the love that had bloomed against all odds. "They taught us that love is a choice you make every day," Grace said, her voice thick with tears. "That kindness can change lives, that hope is always possible, that family is the greatest treasure. They built a beautiful life together, and we are all the beneficiaries of that love. They may be gone from this world, but their love lives on in every one of us." The family gathered at the house afterward, 3 generations sharing memories and food, laughter and tears, celebrating 2 lives well lived and a love that had stood the test of time. The house that Yates had built and expanded over the years was filled with the descendants of a cowboy who stopped to help a desperate woman, and a woman who was brave enough to accept that help and trust in the possibility of love. And somewhere, in whatever comes after, Yates and Zelda were together again, young and strong, riding into a golden sunset with all the time in the world and the knowledge that they had lived and loved exactly as they were meant to, their story complete and perfect and forever entwined. Their legacy lived on through the generations that followed. William's legal work helped establish fair labor practices in Colorado, directly impacting thousands of workers and their families. Emma's construction company built affordable housing for working families, carrying on her father's commitment to quality and fairness. Grace's art captured the spirit of the West and the beauty of human connection. Her most famous painting depicting a young woman standing at a fort and a cowboy approaching on horseback, titled "Passage." Great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren heard the story of Yates and Zelda, of how their love began with an act of simple kindness at Fort Laramie in 1878, and how that love had shaped not just their lives, but the lives of everyone who came after. The story became family legend, told and retold, a reminder that one moment of compassion could ripple outward indefinitely, that love could bloom even in the harshest circumstances, that hope was always worth holding on to. The small house on the edge of Denver, expanded and renovated over the years, remained in the family for generations, a touchstone and gathering place, filled with photographs and mementos of Yates and Zelda and the life they had built together. The garden they had planted and tended still bloomed each spring, a living testament to their care and nurturing, and family members made pilgrimages to their graves to pay respects and remember. And so the story of a woman left at a fort with no money and a passing cowboy who said, "You have passage now," became more than just a romance, more than just a survival story. It became a testament to the power of kindness, the resilience of the human spirit, and the transformative nature of love. Yates and Zelda Crawford had taken the broken pieces of their individual lives and forged something beautiful and lasting, proving that sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest futures, and that love, when it is true and deep and chosen every single day, can overcome anything. Their story was complete, their journey from that dusty fort in Wyoming Territory to the peaceful cemetery overlooking Denver, a testament to what 2 people could build when they chose each other, supported each other, and loved each other through every season of life. The passage Yates offered that day was not just a wagon ride to Denver, but passage into a new life, a better life, a life filled with purpose and meaning and love that lasted beyond death itself. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy anyone could leave behind, The knowledge that they had loved well and been loved in return, that they had made the world a little better for their presence in it, and that their story would continue to inspire and encourage long after they were gone. The passage Yates offered Zelda on that desperate day in 1878 had led them both home, not to a place but to each other, and that home had been strong enough, loving enough, true enough to last not just a lifetime but through all the generations that followed, a beacon of hope and proof that love, real love, the kind worth fighting for and holding on to, could truly conquer all.